Okay friends, it's time to get started on our job. One of the first things you want to do is safely raise and support the rear of the vehicle so the wheels are up and off the ground. After that, if you have one of these center covers, go ahead and use a prying device, carefully get underneath it and pull it off of the wheel. Now once you have it off of there, you're going to continue on to removing all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts. After that, remove the wheel. Let's move along to removing our 2 10mm caliper slider bolts. As you remove any of your mounting hardware, make sure you give it a thorough inspection. If it needs to be replaced, it only makes sense to replace it. Continue on with a pry bar, and we're going to carefully get in between this area of the caliper. What I want to do is gently try to pry, and while I'm prying on the outside here up against the rotor, what I'm looking for is to see the piston of the caliper making its way in. Now once you have plenty of slack in this area, we can carefully roll this off of here. Now that we have the caliper off of there, we're going to continue on to removing the pads from the caliper. If you were to look at the outer pad, you're going to find that it has 2 ears that hold it to the caliper itself. I'm going to carefully get in between this area and gently try to pry it to separate it. Once it starts to separate, generally you can try to squeeze on it and pull it right on off of there. Once you have your pad off of there, I always just give it a close inspection. I want to make sure it doesn't look like it's worn at an angle. If it's worn at an angle, that could essentially mean you have an issue with one of the sliders. This looks fine. Now we can remove the inner pad. For this one, you just grab onto it and pull it towards the outer aspect of the caliper. You can see the back ears that mount into the piston of the caliper itself. Give that pad a quick inspection, set it aside. Once you have the pads out of there, you want to give the caliper a thorough inspection. This area right along here is considered a dust boot, and behind there, there's actually some fluid. You want to make sure you don't see any fluid coming out of this area. If you see fluid, you're going to have to replace the caliper. This one looks okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and push this back the rest of the way. Now I'm going to continue on with a caliper compression tool. I'm going to take one of the ears and bring it right up inside that piston. Now what I'm going to try to do is try to squeeze the piston all the way up into the caliper. Once you feel as though you have the piston fully inside the caliper, you want to just give it one last look to make sure you still don't see any fluid. Ours looks fine, so at this point I'm going to set this aside. Now it's going to be time to remove the rotor. I always like to take one of my lug nuts and I start it on the stud, just in case when I give this a loving bonk, I don't want it to come flying off and potentially hurt me. Now I'll continue with a hammer. Once it's broken free, carefully remove it from the axle. All right, now it's time to start cleaning everything up out here. We're going to continue by cleaning the area of the axle where the rotor is going to sit. Once you have the main surface cleaned down, continue on cleaning in between the studs and the hub. Now we can pause in this area, and let's move along to the area where the caliper is going to sit. Now on these, typically you're going to find some metallic tins. Now we can move along to removing these. I always like to give them a close inspection. Do the same to the other one. Next, we're going to have to sand down the areas where those tins were, especially right along the top area here, along each of the sides. We'll do the bottom and the same to the top. It's extremely important to make sure you get any raised area off of these. If you don't, there's a possibility your pads could get bound up, in which case you're going to have brake drag. Please, let's get off any of the excess. Continue on with some high temperature caliper lubricant. This is going to help with vibration dampening and noise reduction. Also, it'll help prevent moisture from making its way in here and rotting things out. Once you have the area cleaned and well lubricated, we'll continue on to our tins. Go ahead and put those right into position and slide them down so they're locked in. Now it's going to be time to get ready to install our rotor. Let's make sure we clean it down first. Now for the backside, you not only want to make sure you clean this area, but you need to clean this inner portion where the emergency brake shoes ride as well. Let's use some copper never sees. Now we can put our rotor on here. Once you have the rotor slid into position, the next thing you want to do is try to press it directly up against the axle. And while it's up against there, try giving it a little spin. We're trying to listen for a little bit of brake drag coming from those emergency brake shoes. You don't want to have it to the point that it's over tightened and you have too much drag, because drag will cause heat, and of course that's going to cause an issue. I have a very minimal amount of drag right here. This feels good. But if you do have to adjust it, you come along the back side of the backing plate. Go ahead and remove that rubber safety plug here. And then right on the inside, you're going to find the adjuster wheel. We'll come in right through the hole towards the back side, and then you can just easily de-adjust it by pushing in and lifting up. To adjust it out, you go ahead and press it in and pull it down. As you're doing that, just go ahead and keep testing it and make sure it's just right. Once you have it perfectly adjusted, continue on with your protective cover. Now it's going to be time to start taking care of our caliper. I'm going to go ahead and make sure I clean off any of the rust or debris that might be in this area. Once again, we're making sure that we do not have a leak coming from this boot here. If you see any fluid, you need to go ahead and replace that caliper. Assuming that's good, let's move along to the caliper slider pins. There's two of them, one on either side of the caliper. We're just going to take this and I'm going to try to press it right down through. I'll hold onto the boot down along the bottom side and pull it like that. And now we can fully remove this. Once you have it out of there, give it a thorough inspection. Make sure it doesn't look rusted, rotted, or damaged in any way. Assuming that looks okay, we can set it aside. Now we're going to pay attention to the boot itself. You want to go ahead and give it a little squeeze and make sure it's still soft and pliable. It's not damaged or worn. This one's not ripped or torn, so I don't have to worry about any debris or moisture making its way in. Let's go ahead and clean this using a rag. Now when I do this, typically I just take a rag and I'm going to try to slide it right on through. You can try to roll it up, whatever you have to do, even try forcing it through with a small dowel pin or even a screwdriver. Whatever you do, just be very careful not to damage the boot in any way. Once you have the rag through, just go ahead and roll the boot around on it to try to clean out the inside. We want to try to remove any of that existing grease that might be in that area. Let's give that one last inspection inside. Now we'll do the same to the other one. We can set that caliper aside and let's start dealing with the caliper slider pins. I'm going to go ahead and wipe this down and we're going to give it that thorough inspection that I mentioned. We want to make sure it's not rotted, but especially up near the areas closest to the ends. You can find that there's a little bevel on either side. That's where the boot has to go. You need to make sure it's clean and free of any debris, otherwise moisture or debris could make its way inside and seize this up. Go ahead and wipe it down. If you do find that there's rust in there, generally that's okay. Just go ahead and scrape it out of there or even use a wire wheel or a brush. Now we're going to take some more of that high temperature caliper grease. We're going to come right along the entire shaft of the slider pin and even trying to make our way up into one of these grooves here. As I start sliding this through, I'll continue lubricating the rest of the pin. Just grab one side here and roll it right in. There we are. Now I'm going to start pressing this through. Now what you're going to find as you start sliding it through the boot is that generally it's going to push off most of the grease that's in this area. So with that said, I'm going to come from the other side with my grease brush and just try to lubricate the inside. Now, like I said, I'm going to continue pressing this through. Lubricate it along the way, especially into that groove. Now we'll just slide it until both sides of the boots are into the grooves. After that, just go ahead and work it back and forth, clean up your mess, and do the exact same thing on the other side. Now it's going to be time to use some high temperature caliper lube on each of these two ears on the caliper. Once you have both of those lubricated, move along to the piston. You only really need to lubricate the metallic aspect right in the center here. Now it's time for the brake pads. Make sure you've got the right side for the vehicle. Of course, you could compare it to the originals that you went ahead and removed. For the inner pad, you're going to find that it has 3 tabs. Those 3 tabs need to fit up inside the piston. You want to be very careful while you're doing this so you don't get any of your grease on your brake pad material. Just carefully press this right up in here. It can be a little stiff, but that's okay. Now that we carefully put our inner pad in, and you can tell that it's bottomed out against the piston, let's continue on to the outer pad. I'll set this right up on the leaf spring. Now if you were to look at the outer pad, looking at the back side, you're going to find that it has the 2 locking tabs. Underneath those tabs, you're going to find a couple little pitons that come protruding out and through, and those are supposed to fit into the corresponding holes on the outside of the caliper. Just start sliding this in. There we are. Now at this point, you want to give it a quick inspection. Make sure that the pad is completely situated up against the caliper ears. If it seems like it's sitting up a little bit, more than likely the little pitons aren't sticking through the position on the caliper that they need to be. Also, when we're doing this, you want to pay attention to the pads themselves. You'll notice on one side of each of the pads, they have the double ear, like this right here. On the other side, it has a single ear. You want to make sure you have the singles both located on the same side and the doubles as well. Now let's just go ahead and take this and we're going to slide it right on over that caliper. We want to make sure that we slide the doubles down into their position on the bracket, and also make sure that the slider pin isn't getting bound up. Once it's fit in perfectly, it should slide into position and you can continue on with your 2 caliper slider pins. We'll continue on with these 2 bolts. When we go to install them, just apply a thin amount of red thread locker to the very end of the threaded areas. After that, start them in, bottom them out. Let's torque each of these to 20 foot-pounds. Let's get our wheel back up on here. We're going to start on all 5 of our 19mm lug nuts. We'll bottom them out and then torque the wheel to 100 foot-pounds. With the wheel safely back down on the ground, let's go ahead and torque these to the 100 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. Torqued. If you have one of these center covers, go ahead and put it on now. Looking at the backside, you can tell that it has one area that protrudes a little bit differently than the rest. That needs to fit into one of the lug nut holes on the rim. Okay friends, so I showed you how to do one side of your brakes. The process is going to be the exact same thing for the other side of the vehicle. After that, go ahead and make sure that you pump up your brake pedal till it's nice and firm. Make your way under the hood over here and double check your master cylinder. This is where the brake fluid is going to be located. If it looks like it's a little low, just go ahead and open this cap, lift it up, take a peek. Top it off with some .3 brake fluid, and then of course make sure it's sealed tightly. That's going to help keep moisture and debris out of there. Close the hood, take it for a road test. Thanks for watching.